Hey guys, Alex from BoardGameCo over here, and welcome to the next video in the series of The Gamer's Guide to Collecting. And in this video, we're going to talk about where to sell your games. You have a bunch of games, you decide to sell them, you've been watching all my videos about keeping a lean collection and holding on to games that you're not playing anymore and figuring out what to do with the games you want to get rid of, and you've decided you're not trading them. We'll cover trading in another video, but rather you are selling them. And so this video is going to talk about where to sell them and going through that process. Now I'm going to give the same disclaimer I gave last time, which is obviously I am Alex from BoardGameCo. We buy games. I am inherently biased in this conversation. At the same time, I will try to do my utmost, fairness in terms of covering the pros and cons, why you should sell to us, why you shouldn't sell to us. I'm going to cover our competitors. So in terms of other people you can buy games from, those people are going to be listed down below as well, or in this video down below. I don't know if I'm doing links yet. We'll find out later. But yeah, I'm going to do as good a job I can of being as fair as possible, but obviously take this bias into account. I want your business, so, figure out what you want to do with that information. That being said, let's start off with a few things, and I'm going to make a note. Stick around to the end of the video. I'll have timestamps down below, but I will specifically cover slightly different tips in terms of selling your Kickstarter games. In terms of selling high value games that you're trying to get your money back on, I do have different advice, and I'll cover exactly how I do it myself. But before we get into that, I'll cover that at the end of the video. I'm going to start with a bit of a breakdown of the difference between selling direct to somebody else who wants your games, and selling to a store. Okay, offhand, there's going to be subsections within each, different ways to sell direct, as well as different stores to sell to. But across the board, the first difference you're looking for is when you sell direct, when you sell to someone who wants the game for their own collection, you're generally looking at more hassle but more money back. That is the short version of it. More hassle but more money back. And the reason for that is because when you're selling to someone who wants the game, if you want the Castles of Burgundy, somebody wants the Castles of Burgundy for their own collection, well, you know what? If you sell this to BoardGameCo, if you sell this to Noble Knight Games, if you sell this to your local game store, if you sell it to any business trying to make money off of it, we have to then sell it to that person as well. And along the way, not only do we have to sell it and have our own profit margin built in, but we also have to account for shipping costs. We have to account for the employee cost of actually handling the items. We have to account for damages, because over time, you're always going to have some games missing pieces. You're going to have some games that arrive damaged. We have to factor in all these expenses when the direct person at the end doesn't. So let's use Castle of Burgundy as a basic example. If we want to sell that used copy of Castle of Burgundy, the new 20th anniversary edition, if we want to sell it for $38, okay, and somebody else is willing to pay that $38, well, we can't buy it from you for $38. That should be self-evident. Obviously, we have to offer you less, and how much less will vary. In the case of us, BoardGameCo, we generally say somewhere between 25 to 50% of that. So if we're doing $38, if we're selling it for $38, we can offer you between $8.50 and $19 for that game. And that variance for us will depend on the popularity, how quickly the game will sell, all that stuff. But the basic idea is a store has to account for multiple things that the end consumer doesn't. They have to account for damages, shipping costs, and of course profit margin, otherwise why else would they buy your game? Additionally, with many games, a store can buy that game for cheaper than $38 to begin with, direct from the distributor, with free shipping, new game, no damages, any damages on them. So it's a whole different value proposition. So a store will offer you less money. Again, stores will offer you less money. This is true. If you find a store that's willing to offer you as much money as a end consumer, good luck with that. Every once in a while we get emails from customers who are like, well, here are the market value of the games, this is what I'm looking for. And I'm like, good luck with that, but we have to make money or we wouldn't buy them from you. Now, the flip side, so why would you sell to a store? The flip side is because of the fact that you will deal with far less effort and energy when you sell to a store. Now, this isn't true for one game. For one game, there's a little bit less effort and energy, but not a lot. Again, using Castles of Burgundy as an example. If you want to sell it to somebody else, you have to go through multiple steps of trying to find the target buyer. Not a ton of work, but definitely a little work. Whereas if you sell it to a store, all you have to do is email the store or walk into your local game store if they buy used games and just say, hey, I want to sell this. You'll get a quote, you'll say yes or no, you move on. It's far faster because the store is going to deal with finding the other buyer later, or they have a network, a framework, a system set up to find that buyer. So it's a totally different level of effort and energy, and that's just with one game. If you're selling 15 games, you have to go through that with 15 different games, and then you have to pack it up and ship to 15 different places. Maybe if you sold a few to the same person, maybe you'll ship to 10 places, you'll get lucky. Versus a store will be a single shipment, move on, and done. So off the bat, selling to a store will be far more convenient, far easier, but you will get less money per game. If you have time but no money, or time but less money, I recommend selling to consumers. If you have less time and more money, sell to a store. Ultimately, that's a big chunk of time covering that breakdown of why to sell to a store, why to sell to us, to Noble Knight, to whoever, versus selling it to a consumer. Now that we've covered that breakdown, let's cover where can you sell games. Now, some of you will know a lot of this already. This is going to be completely obvious, old information to some of you, and for some of you, this will be helpful. Either way, I'll have various timestamps below so you can skip stuff that isn't really helpful. So number one is BoardGameGeek. BoardGameGeek is a website, you've probably heard of it, but it's basically, one of the things it has in it is it has a marketplace. It has a place where you can sell your games. It's very easy to actually set up and sell the games. They make it very easy to set up the initial streamlininess. Anyways, they make it very easy to set up the game, to sell the game. And the pros of selling on BoardGameGeek, it has a very large audience of hardcore gamers and lighter gamers looking for games, and it has a very low fee structure. They take roughly 3%, I believe, plus you have to figure out the PayPal fee or whatever you take. The cons of BoardGameGeek, it has a terrible, I'm going to call it a flake rate. The amount of people who will buy your game, who will check out, who just disappear after, it is large, and it's very hard to avoid. You have to deal with the fact that you're going to get a lot of flakes buying your games. For some reason, despite how serious BoardGameGeek is as a website, the marketplace has never really escalated to that next level, to that eBay, to that Amazon, to whatever. Large flake rate on BoardGameGeek, and additionally, it can be a bit of a graveyard. What I mean by that is, because of the way the listings are set up and because of how often people post things, you'll list something there, and then over time it kind of just slowly dies. You'll have to take it off and relist it. It can be a bit of a graveyard, has a lot of eyeballs, but a lot of competition for those eyeballs. So that's the pros and cons of BoardGameGeek. Number two is your local Facebook group. Now, I don't know if you have one, but if you have a local gaming group that you can tap into, that's a great way to go about it. If you don't have one, and if you're in the US, there's a Facebook group called Board Game Exchange. That great place to buy and sell games. There are Reddit threads there. When I say Facebook group, I don't necessarily mean Facebook. I just mean whatever local group you have, whether it's Reddit, whether it's Meetup, whether it's Facebook. Very often there will be local groups catered to whether it's playing games and or selling games and or both. The great thing about this, and again, Board Game Exchange is great across the US in general, and I'll reference that down below as well, because that's it's a giant Facebook group with 30,000 people or something. It's a great way to get a lot of eyeballs as well. The cons, again, we'll start with actually pros first. Pros, no fees. Off the bat, no fees. That's great right there. Secondly, there's a FOMO aspect, and it's more personal, meaning because of the nature of these groups and the way things are shared, you pop up a few photos of a game, and suddenly Castle of Burgundy isn't an abstract title. It's, it's right there, and it's on the floor in a little snapshot, and it looks like a game you want to get. There's a FOMO aspect to having it front and center in your face. And additionally, there's a possibility of no shipping, especially if it is local and it's not more, nationwide or whatnot. But if it's more local, then you can get away with no shipping, which means you'll find someone who's willing to pay more because they don't have to factor in that shipping cost. The cons are that, again, they tend to have high flake rates. The larger the group, the higher the flake rate, the less personal it becomes. The smaller the group, the less flake rate, but the less eyeballs. It can be very hard to manage your listings. Additionally, it can be hard to manage your listings on this group and keep track of what you have where. And finally, while no shipping can be a pro, sometimes for people, leaving your house and finding someone to go to can be far, far more work than just packing it up and shipping it. So local exchanges for some is a blessing, a boon, makes it easy for everyone to save, and for others it's a huge hassle. It depends on the person. Next up, we have eBay. eBay is obviously a very large website, and eBay is another great place to sell your board games. Now, the problem with eBay let's cover the pros first. Pros, very low flake rate. eBay's done a great job of making sure buyers who buy your stuff, they continue and they execute on the sale. So you don't have that problem at all. Has a huge audience, lots of eyeballs. Again, very, very helpful. In terms of ease of doing it, it's kind of a pain the first time. I would say it's probably the hardest of the three in terms of your first time selling something. But once you've gone through the motions a few times, it can become very easy. But they do make you jump through a bunch of hoops, and if you're not used to it, it can be harder to get into it. In terms of the cons, I just mentioned one of the cons, so we skipped a bit. But additionally, it has the worst fees of anything by far. By the time you cover eBay fees and PayPal fees and whatever fees, you're looking at between 12 to 15% to sell your stuff, and that's a lot of money off the top. Additionally, it's the auction listings. Auction listings on eBay are absolutely terrible. I do not recommend them for board games. For other things, they can be great. For board games, it's too hit and miss. Sometimes you'll have something that has enough eyeballs, enough attention that you'll get its fair value. Other times you'll put up a copy of Caverna and it'll go for $20 less than it should have because there wasn't enough attention on it that week. For some reason, eBay has not become the dominant place for board gamers to buy games, especially used. So it again has a lot of eyeballs, but I don't recommend auction listings unless you really don't care what it goes for. Lastly, I'll just mention off the tangent, I'm not going to go into pros and cons, but there's also Craiglist and Amazon. Amazon tends to be a lot of work to go through the initial setup, which is why I'm not really going to go into it. I don't recommend it for anyone who's selling a few games. You really want to be a hardcore seller if you're even going to try to sell on Amazon. And Craigslist is a little tougher, has some of the pros and cons aspect that we talked about. You can try it, it has some of the pros. It's not what I generally would recommend. I'd recommend starting with BoardGameGeek, local Facebook groups, and eBay before you dive down the Craigslist rabbit hole. Those are the main ways I would recommend selling direct to a consumer, direct to someone who's buying the games for themselves. In terms of selling to stores, well, it really comes down to three categories. Ourselves, Noble Knight Games, and your local game store. Your local game store, to start off with, is the pro of selling to your local game store. And I will say this offhand, if your local game store buys used board games, I probably recommend them over ourselves, over BoardGameCo, or Noble Knight Games. And the reason for that is because they may very well offer more. I say may, it depends on the store. I can't cover every single store in the US. I don't know their policies, but offhand, they are more incentivized to offer more because they don't have to factor in shipping to their costs. When BoardGameCo buys a box of games from you, we have to factor in the shipping price. That shipping price is a sunk cost. You don't benefit, we don't benefit. It literally gets taken out of what we can offer you because it doesn't really matter. We have to factor that into our ability to resell and our profit margins. Your local game store does not have to worry about that if you're selling them a box of games, so they can potentially offer you more. Now, they may not because they also have a smaller audience to buy those used games. So you might want to try a quote with them, try a quote with us, try a quote with whoever. You may, but they have a reason to offer more and a reason not to offer more, and that could be a benefit to them and yourselves. The cons is most game stores, there's no real con to selling to your local game store. I would just say most local game stores don't buy used games. There definitely are many that have programs, but I would say the majority do not. So that's a simple phone call. Just call up your local game stores, see if they buy used games, see what the quoting process is, figure it out. I will say one more con is it can be a bit of a pain, and this is local stores in general, not just game stores, but like even half-price books. And I don't recommend half-price books, by the way. They will offer you so little. They'll make our quotes, which are already lower than people sometimes expect, they'll make our quotes look amazing. I do not recommend half-price books at all for selling used games. It's basically you walk in, you drop your games on the counter, you'll get a terrible quote, and you'll give up and sell it to them because you just don't want to go through the process again. Which brings me to the con of local game stores, which is they can, depending on the store, they might have a similar process where you kind of have to drop off your games, slowly wait, slowly get a quote, and then you might just end up saying yes because you just don't want to deal with the process of getting your games back to whatever. And then from there, lastly, we have BoardGameCo and Noble Knight Games. Now, the two of us are fairly competitive, fairly similar in the pros and cons aspect. I can only think of one tiny pro and con, which is I believe, based on some times where people have mentioned the quotes they've gotten whenever they've come to us, I believe our quotes are marginally better than Noble Knight Games. Marginally. Marginally to the point that if you've had a better experience with Noble Knight Games, I just recommend trying them. If you've had a better experience with us, I recommend you continuing to use us. Our prices are fairly competitive. Our quotes seem to come back a little bit better, very marginal, so that's one reason to choose us. The flip side of that is the times I have seen our quotes not come through as much, as high, are when you're selling more peripherals, meaning BoardGameCo heavily focuses on board games. If you are selling RPGs, if you're selling miniatures, if you're selling comic books, if you're adding anything else to your offer, then Noble Knight is probably a better place to go because they deal with that stuff more and will offer you more. In the case of us, in the case of our quotes, we'll basically bury that and barely offer anything for stuff like RPGs and miniatures. So in that sense, Noble Knight can be a better fit if you're selling a wider assortment of items. But again, we are very neck and neck. I don't want to say we're better. We are not. We are very neck and neck in terms of the process of selling games. In terms of buying games, our prices are far cheaper. I have no problem saying that. You can just go on our site, go on their site, check it out, not a problem. In terms of buying, I would say we're fairly competitive. So either one, pick your shot, go from there. Lastly, the last thing I will mention that is often a great opportunity is local game stores very often have like these flea market sales where everyone can come in and sell their games. And similarly, not just local game stores, but if you go to conventions, that is another great way to try to sell your games. It's a way, it falls into the direct-to-consumer category, but I kind of buried it underneath because it's usually sub-run by larger organizations, larger entities. But whenever you have an opportunity to sell one of these giant flea markets, whether it's at a convention, whether it's at a local game store, whether your Meetup is running one, those are often great ways to sell your games at a decent price, usually a little less than direct-to-consumer, but a little more than selling to a game store. It has that FOMO aspect of people browsing the aisle, seeing these great deals of used games that are significantly cheaper, and you can see the game, you can see the quality. Those are really a great way. I highly recommend taking advantage of those if or when you can. And finally, like I said in the beginning, I will cover Kickstarter games, because Kickstarter games I recommend, well, specifically I'll tell you what I do with Kickstarter games, because as you know, I have a lot of Kickstarters, I get a lot of Kickstarters. I don't keep all the Kickstarters. I probably get rid of a majority of them. And when I do that, I usually use BoardGameExchange. BoardGameExchange, I'll link to it down below. It's a Facebook group. Highly recommend it. The reason I use BoardGameExchange, as opposed to when I have other games I'm getting rid of, I usually just send it to our own warehouse, and I just usually use BoardGameCo, and done and easy. For those larger games, they're large enough that a little bit extra effort, a little bit extra micromanagement, and trying to avoid any fees whatsoever can be very helpful. It can really drive home however little fees you can get in. Maybe you pay the 3% on PayPal, but that's it. Still a plus. If you're selling a $300 all-in Kickstarter, that's a lot of money, and spending a little bit extra time eking out a little bit of a better return by being a little bit more personal and avoiding an extra, even a 3% fee on BoardGameGeek. Those things can save you money when you're talking about larger games. For myself, I don't do that with smaller stuff. If I had, I'm trying to think of the last, Skull Hollow. Skull Hollow was a Kickstarter game that I got, I traded away. I actually just covered that recently in one of my look back videos, and I did not go through those steps on Skull Hollow because selling a $40 game, I'll sell it the regular way. So for my case, I sent it to my warehouse. We shipped it as part of BoardGameCo, worked for me. In terms of the larger games, I don't sell them through BoardGameCo. I sell them through BoardGameExchange for the most part. I just find that is a large group, has a lot of FOMO, a lot of people buying Kickstarters. It tends to be a great way to get a very good return. I believe it's US only. I'm sorry for that. I really feel bad when I do these videos, and my advice is more US centric. To whatever extent you can apply these things internationally, please do. But this advice in general is a little more US centric. So yeah, that's basically it. That's how I cover, that's how I sell games in terms of the direct-to-consumer, the selling to a store, in terms of selling your giant Kickstarter game where you want to try to get as much return as possible. I'll link to as much as possible down in the comments below. I'll have timestamps on everything. If you have any questions, by all means, let me know. I'll be doing this as a continuous series of different things of, one of the videos that I'll have coming up will be how to pack your games, what you need to know about payment information, some peripheral stuff like that. I'll be covering how to trade, how to sell. I'll be covering how to buy games and save money. This whole Board Gamer's Guide to Collecting will be part of a running series where I just cover the things I have been doing both as a consumer before I started getting into this, turning this into a business, as well as from a business stance, what I find to be helpful or what not. Hopefully you enjoy. Feel free to comment down below. Like I said, questions are welcome, and I will put that information in future videos. Until next time, I'm Alex from BoardGameCo. Links as always down below. Subscribe, comment, engage, and until next time, have a good one.